thinking. That's really good bass playing. Actually, let me go ahead and begin today by starting a sermon how I love to begin sermons, and that is by offending people. I am not a big fan of essential oils. Now, some of you drank a gallon of them this morning. I don't know. Anyway, I guess for some time now, and you've seen some ebbs and flows with respect to the whole experience of essential oils and people using them or not. And let me just say, I'm not suggesting that there is no benefit to be gained whatsoever, and maybe you have had some sort of experience yourself with them that was somehow a benefit to you, but I'm at best a skeptic of it. Most of my experience, though, with respect to essential oils comes from my sister, who for a period of years, I don't know if she still is a drug dealer, I guess is what you would call that, selling essential oils, which, let's face it, essential oils, I mean, that's like 10W to 30 in bacon grease. Those are our essential oils. Anyway, but she was doing this, selling this stuff for a while, and I'm telling you, she had a concoction for like everything. And there were all these oils I had never heard of. I was familiar with like canola and sunflower and coconut, but there's all of these other oils. And I'm telling you, there was just kind of something for everything. And she was, I used to joke with her about having like a cauldron that she was mixing stuff together, because sometimes you would rub it on. There were like capsules that you could ingest this stuff. And anyway, I was giving her a fit about this. Anyway, one day I had seen she had it's almost like an essential oil cookbook. And so as you look in this recipe book, there's all sorts of ailments. And as you look through these various ailments, there's some sort of oil remedy that you might be able to use for this. And so I don't know if your shoulder's hurting, rub peppermint oil on your left toe or something like that. And fractionated coconut oil seemed to be in everything. And I'm like, what is fractionated coconut oil? Anyway, so there's all these recipes for these various ailments in there. And what really caught my attention is that there was literally almost something for everything. And what caught my attention especially was, if you look in there under AIDS, I kid you not, there was an essential oil for AIDS. And I thought, back in the 80s, so, I mean, when everybody was scared to death, that's what we were missing. There was an essential oil mixture. That's what we need. And the AIDS epidemic, especially in Africa, that's what they just need, some essential oils. Not only did that catch my attention, but this one did too. Traumatic brain injury. Let's say you've been in a car wreck. Or maybe this afternoon, you're in a car wreck and you hit your head on the steering wheel. Paramedics rush you to the trauma unit at Moses Cone. Don't you want the doctor who was there, the attendants, the nurses, everyone around, what oil do we use for brain injury? I'm like, really? There's an oil for AIDS. There's an oil for traumatic brain injury. But in truth, there was an oil for everything. Regardless of the circumstance, there was some sort of oil that you could use. With that in mind, or that notion of there always being something, I want you to realize that as a follower of Christ, there are circumstances that every one of us are going to face that are unique. Because there's only one you, there's only one me. And even if we experience some similarities, ultimately every one of the paths that we are going is unique. And every one of them is ultimately one that experiences some differences. But what I want you to realize is that for every path that you and I are going down, every choice that you and I make, in fact, every circumstance that we experience, it is not that there is an essential oil, but it is the case that there are some essential truths about God that are true and need to be in your mind as you go through not just some circumstances, but every circumstance. Whether that is traumatic brain injury, whether that is job loss, whether that is marriage, whether that is childbirth, whatever it is, there are some things that are true in every single circumstance about God that you and I encounter. Well, what are those? We're going to be thinking about the answer to that question today as the beginning to a series where we're going to be looking at the life of Gideon. And today we're not actually going to be introduced to Gideon. We'll start that next week. It just seems kind of fitting. We're thinking about Gideons this month, so we'll actually look about Gideon. But before we get to him, we kind of need to understand the context of what was going on and the scenario, the circumstances into which God raises up Gideon. And so this series is called Fearless, but before we can get to that, we need to think about what the context says, because it really does help answer the question for us: what is it? What are the truths about God that I need to know in every single circumstance that I experience? Look with me in your Bibles today to Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6, and this is where we begin to get the story of Gideon. But before we get into that, and we're introduced to him in verse 11, we're going to look at these first 10 verses. We're told that the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord handed them over to Midian for 7 years, and they oppressed Israel. Because of Midian, the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, the caves, and the strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the Kedemites came and attacked them. They encamped against them and destroyed the produce of the land, even as far as Gaza. They left nothing for Israel to eat, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For the Midianites came with their cattle and their tents like a great swarm of locusts. They and their camels were without number, and they entered the land to lay waste to it. So Israel became poverty-stricken because of Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. When the Israelites cried out to him because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to them, and he said, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I brought you out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. I rescued you from the power of Egypt and the power of all who oppressed you. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the God of the Amorites whose land you live in, but you did not obey me." As I said a moment ago, every one of our experiences is unique, and you're not going to experience what they specifically went through. But whatever it is that you have been going through this week, whatever reality is that you awakened to this morning, and whatever it is that you're going to face this week, if you are someone that has a relationship with Christ, if you're a follower of God, there are some things about God that are going to be true in whatever circumstance you encounter. And the first is this, based on what we see, is that God sees what is going on. God sees what is going on. Now, if you start in verse 1, it almost seems like it's the beginning of the story, but it's actually the continuation of something that has been going on for some period of time. Just for context's sake, hopefully you remember that once the children of Israel have left slavery in Egypt, you remember God raised up Moses to lead them out, they finally get to the promised land. They finally go into the promised land. But you remember the promised land wasn't empty. It was filled with residents, and God was going to give them victory over the inhabitants of the promised land. So they're going to have to go in and claim it. They're going to have to go in and overtake it. But before they go in, God gave them some very specific instructions. Among the things he said to them was this: do not intermarry with these people. And it was not because God was some sort of xenophobe or racist, or because God was afraid of some sort of diversity. Rather, it was, in fact, he gave the reason as to why he forbade this. And it was, they will turn your hearts from me. And so if you intermarry with these individuals who don't know me, who don't walk with me, who are worshiping all sorts of idols and all sorts of man-made deities, if you hitch your wagon to them, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to follow their lead and you're going to abandon me. And of course, they were like I'm sure we are, which is to say, oh no, I'll never do that. But they begin to go in and experience conquest and victory, and they overtake this land. And unfortunately, they did not pay attention to the counsel of God, and they started, bit by bit, intermarrying, polluting their commitment to God with the influence of idolatry and pagan worship. And so they start doing things not God's way, but the idol's way and the Canaanites' way. And what God does is that he works in through some difficult circumstances that he brings to bear on them. And so there are a number of difficulties and a number of challenges that they are experiencing. In fact, by the time you get to chapter 4, God has been working and bringing some bad consequences to them. And then when they come back to God, when they return, what God does is that he raises up somebody to advance the ball further, to help guide them as they get back on track. And in chapter 4, we read about this woman whose name is Deborah that God raises up to serve as a judge over Israel. And by the time you see the end of her reign, you get to the end of chapter 4, we're told that the land had peace for 40 years. So things have been going really, really well. For the first time in a long time, and now for a long time, things have been going well. The people of God have been acting like God's people. But then you get to verse 1 of chapter 6, and you see that they began to revert to their old ways, and they began to do what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And God was not indifferent to this, and so we're told that the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for a period of 7 years. Sometimes what God does is to bring a particular enemy nation in, and they conquer them, and they lay hold of and possession of their land. It doesn't seem that that's necessarily what's going on here. Rather, it's like the Midianites, these enemy marauders, just keep coming in and plundering. And so what would happen is that they come in, and we're told that they take everything. Or at least if it's worth anything, they come in and take it. And so the Hebrews, they have planted fields, and they have tilled the land, and they have been investing and watering and weeding and doing all this stuff. And come harvest time, the Midianites show up, and they take all the corn. They take all of the wheat. They take all of the produce. The animals that they have, they take those. Anything that's worth something, they take it. And as they're doing so, they're not being careful. They're destroying any and everything so that people start hiding. And they're hiding anything that is of value or anything that is of consequence to them. Where? Any safe place. In caves, in holes, anywhere. It's terrible. And so the Hebrews, they're getting knocked down. The Midianites come in, they take their stuff, and then they leave. And so the Israelites kind of hobble back. They get up on their feet. They plant some more. And as soon as there's another harvest, they come in and do it again. And every time they seem to get up, they keep getting knocked down again and again and again, so that they become, according to verse 6, poverty-stricken because of Midian. But you can endure this for a year or two, but this has been going on now for 7 years. Every single harvest gets taken. Anytime they get a herd together, the marauders come in and take it. They are low on food. Their sheep have been taken. They don't have any wool. They don't have oxes and donkeys to help. Everything is done by hand. So the little bit that they can grow, everything is impeded by these Midianites who keep coming in year after year after year, season after season. And if it is good at all, they take it. And they are crying out to the Lord. They're poverty-stricken. We have nothing, God. They keep taking it. What do you think they're saying to God? That they are saying, Lord, this is what is going on. God, these horrible people, these Midianites, these pagans, they keep coming in, and every single year, every single season, they keep doing this, and we've got nothing left. We can't plow enough fields anymore because we don't have any animals. Our clothes are threadbare because we don't have enough sheep. We are literally starving to death. We have nothing to trade with. We have nothing to barter with. We are absolutely desolate at this point. And as they are calling out to the Lord, what do you think that they are saying? Probably a few things. They're probably saying, God, this is terrible. This stinks. Really stinks. This is tragic. This is awful. And these horrible people keep doing these horrible things to us, season in and season out, year in and year out. And keep in mind, this has been going on not for 7 years now that this has been going on. Please change this. Please intervene. Please do something. We're going to talk more about in just a moment the specific response that God gives them. But as God responds, one of the things that becomes very clear, not only to them, but should become clear to us, is that God saw what was going on. And therein lies the application for me. Therein lies the application for you. And it seems almost too simple to worth noting, but it's so important that we can't overlook it. What circumstance are you experiencing? Name it. Are things great? Are things terrible? Is there plenty? Is there loss? Is there the experience of grief? Is there the experience of fear? Is there a physical challenge? Is there economic challenge? Whatever it is, the circumstance that you are facing, I want you to understand this. God sees it. God knows what is going on. And in that, I'm not suggesting that you don't call out to Him, that you don't ask God to work, that you don't talk to Him about what you're facing, but understand this, He's not surprised by anything that you are encountering. And so when you put your head at night, you're trying to figure out what's going on and how to navigate and what your next step is going to be. God is not surprised that you are going through this. He knows not just how you feel and what you're thinking about in the moment. He knows the totality of the circumstance. He knows everything that is going on, and we have to know, we have to remind ourselves this week, tomorrow, the circumstances that I face, God's not going to be surprised by. He sees what's going on. In fact, He already knows what is going to occur. The losses that you may experience in the coming month or the coming year, the loved ones that you may say goodbye to, the tragedy that may befall you, the blessings that may come into your life, all of these things, from tip to tail, the sum of them, God knows every single one of those details. He knows and wants you to know that whether the tears are in your eyes because you are so sad or because you are so happy, He sees exactly what is going on. And we have to tell ourselves, and we've got to put on the front burner of our mind, that every circumstance that I go into, it's not that there's an essential oil, but there is an essential truth. God sees what is going on. Likely you have heard it before many times over, that there's no such thing as a stupid question, right? We've heard this. And let's be honest, though, also, the only people who say that are those who ask stupid questions, because there are plenty of stupid questions. And oftentimes a stupid question, in my estimation, is when somebody asks a question and they are completely indifferent to the response. By that, I mean, it doesn't make any difference what you say or how you answer. They're going to keep going. For example, and then it could take a couple of different forms. It could be that somebody says, have you ever heard the joke about so-and-so? Or this and that. And you say, oh, yes. And you might even tell them the punchline. And what do? They still tell you the joke. Or maybe it is that someone asks you about, hey, did you hear about this particular circumstance that's going on with so-and-so? And you might say to them, yes, I know about it. In fact, they called me last night and they were telling me all about it. Yeah. And then they start unfolding and they tell you everything that you already know. And you're like, don't you hear good? I said I knew what was going on. I know the details. I really do. Listen, I'm not suggesting, again, that you don't talk to God. In fact, I'm emphatically not saying that you should not talk to God about the circumstances you're facing. But hear me in this. What you are facing, whatever the mountain high or the depth of the valley that you are going through, God sees what is going on. And year after year, as the Midianites are coming in and making God's people so profoundly miserable, so profoundly in want and lack and in need, every bit of that, God was not surprised by. He knew and He saw everything that was going on. Maybe it is in your experience thus far with the Lord, there have been times where you wanted to say, do you see this? Are you aware? Let me just tell you, He is. He is. Sometimes that may be a tough pill to swallow, but understand, in every single circumstance, He sees what's going on. But there's something else that's true in every single circumstance, and that's this. God wants me to see His activity in my reality. God wants me to see His activity in my reality. The Israelites are crying out to God. Makes sense. Things are bad, really bad. Probably for the people living at this point, it's never been so bad before. You've got parents that are thinking, I don't know how we're going to feed the kids. I don't know if the next time they come in, mom or dad may be killed. I don't know what we're going to do. And they are calling out to God. And as they are doing so, they are expressing their need. But what else? You've got to know, they're saying, God, help us. Do something about this. These circumstances stink. What we are going through is terrible. Change this. You've been there, haven't you? Your heart is broken, and you're saying, God, my heart is broken, fix it. I am fearful, I want you to change that fear and give me strength. I'm experiencing loss, and I want you to cause me to not feel that anymore. You know what that is like. And they're calling out to God, saying, this is where I am. Of course, God already knew it, but they're saying, we want you to do something about it. That's what they're saying, right? And what do they want God to do? They want him to reverse their fortunes. They want him to kick the Midianites, stop them from doing this, change the circumstance. That's what they're saying. And what do they get? God, please help us. We don't have anything to eat. God, please help us. We don't have any money. God, please help us. We don't have any flocks or herds. God, please help us. We don't have any crops. And what does God do? In verse 7, actually in verse 8, the Lord sent a prophet. You've got to think when the prophet shows up, they're like, I hope he's got some biscuits. I hope it's him and an army to follow. I hope he's shown up with a wagon train. God, our circumstances are so bad, we want you to do something, and God sends a prophet. And what do prophets do? Well, they come in with a message. And they are specifically tasked with conveying a specific message. And this prophet, who is unnamed, has a specific message. And the message is this. And it starts how most prophecies that God sends and raises up a prophet begin. This is what the Lord God of Israel says. God sent me to tell you this. And it begins by reviewing some of their history. He says, I brought you out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. You've been talking about that for generations. You remember the whole story of Moses and the Red Sea and the manna, and you know all of that. And not only did God lead you out of Egypt, not only did he lead you out of slavery, but he led you into the promised land. And God says, I drove, because it wasn't empty. He says, I drove them out before you and gave you their land. There were wells that you didn't have to dig. There were cities that you didn't have to build. There were marketplaces that you didn't have to establish. And how did you get that? I gave that to you. Just review. Let's review. And I said to you, verse 10, I am the Lord, not the God. I am the Lord, your God. I am your God. You are my people. And God is telling them, I told you, I was very clear. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites, whose land you live in, but what? You wouldn't obey me. What's God saying to them? Well, he's telling them, in part, I see what's going on. But he's also wanting them to see in this circumstance, he wants them to see his activity in their reality. When I use the word reality there, I'm not using it accidentally. I'm conveying the fact that God wants us to see not how things feel and understand how things feel, but how they actually are. The reality, what the Israelites are feeling is need and want and lack and loss and fear. And they believe that to be the sum of their reality. But God is working to try to help them to see that's not how things actually are. You may be feeling that, but there's a reason that you're feeling that. And it's because you didn't do what I very plainly said. Most of you in this room probably have a cell phone. And with your cell phone, likely you have gone in at some point and you have recorded a message. This is so-and-so, and you've reached this number, blah, blah, blah. If you're calling to sell me a car warranty, no. If you're a Nigerian princess that is leading me. Anyway, whatever you say in your message, you have recorded that message. How many of you, well, maybe it was on your phone, or maybe it was back when you had an answering machine, or maybe it's your voicemail at work. You have recorded the message, and as soon as you press pound to finish recording, it starts to play it back. And what do you think? Who is that? Who is that? Who's that? What hillbilly is talking on my phone? I don't sound like that. Or maybe you have seen yourself on video. I mean, somebody posts a video, or maybe it's some event at Christmas, or there's a birthday party, and there's a family member, and they shoot some video, and they post it on Facebook, and you're like, who is that heifer wearing those jeans? Oh, my, that's not me. I don't look like that. I don't sound like that. But you know what? We do. We sound like that. We look like that. But many times it is the case that we simply don't realize it. We don't see how things, we don't hear how things actually are. The people of God are crying out to the Lord, and it makes sense that they are. But all they can see, and all it seems that they understand at this moment, is that things are bad. They believe that to be their reality. And as God speaks to them, as he sends the prophet, he's letting them know this is not coincidence. Let's review. I gave you all of these things, and I gave you that very specific instruction, but you decided we're not going to do this. So what's he saying to them? He's saying you're experiencing this because I brought this on you. This became part of your reality. Things are this way because not only do I see what is going on, but I am active even in these circumstances. Now listen, before you start getting carried away in your mind, maybe you're wondering, well, Michael, are you trying to say if I experience something bad, God is going to try to somehow speak to me and say, it's because I've done something bad and God is somehow trying to get me? I'm emphatically not saying that. Because very simply, in fact, Jesus told us this in as clear language as he possibly could. In this world, you will have trouble. How much? A lot. And there's going to be all sorts of trouble because our world is broken. And from tip to tail, even our bodies and the created order, is affected by sin. So there's going to be trouble, and there's going to be loss, and there's going to be some of that. And so I'm not suggesting that every time that you and I or anybody that's a follower of God, if there's difficulty that falls, that somehow God is trying to stick it to you. But there are instances where God does work through some difficult circumstances, maybe sometimes even that he's the author of, because he is seeking to gain your attention. In the end, what I'm asking you, what I'm encouraging you to do, what I'm encouraging myself to do is this. In my circumstance, I am prone simply to think about how I am feeling in the moment. But I need to understand and I need to tell myself that God sees what is going on, and whether he authors this, whether he permits this, whatever, he is active in this circumstance. Why? Because he said he would be. You remember that in Romans 8, that God uses what things? All things. Good things, bad things, happy things, grievous things, sad things, joyous things, exciting things, fearful things, natural disasters. He uses vacations. God uses everything. He said, I use everything. I cause all things to work together for what he knows is good and for your ultimate good to those that love him and are called according to his purpose. And so many times we simply forget that. We forget that he sees what's going on and he is doing something in this circumstance. Now, with respect to what they're going through, let me say this. This circumstance had been going on for 7 years before God helps them to finally see what he's doing. And I'm saying to you, I'm saying to me, it may take a little while for me to start seeing what he's up to. But I have to know in every circumstance, because he said he would. He said it would be the case, that he would be active and at work. And whether it puts tears in my eyes for sadness or tears in my eyes for joy, he is up to something that is going to be for my ultimate good. And I need to remind myself, he sees what's going on, and in my reality, how things actually are, He's up to something. When I was years ago back in college and seminary working for the bank, I was working as a teller, and especially on Fridays, that would be the busiest day for folks coming in and cashing checks or doing whatever, heading out of town. Anyway, so Fridays are going to be your busy day, and the branches that I had worked at, they tend to have a lot of commercial business as well, and so some of those transactions might take a while. So you had that going on. So there's more traffic, there's more lines in the drive-thru, more lines in the lobby. Besides that, though, the phone would also ring, and we were supposed to answer the phone by the third ring. And I hated that because I'm thinking, I've got a line of customers here, and they are staring a hole. The reason I have no hair on my head is because of the lasers of customers' eyes staring at me because I have answered the phone. And and no customer ever said this, but sometimes you can just feel it, right? And so there's a line from the teller line out to the door, and people come in, and you can tell they're on their lunch break, and they're in a hurry, and they're frustrated as soon as they see that line. And then they see you on the phone, and they're thinking, you're placing like a to-go order, aren't you? I know that's a personal call. I know that has nothing. You need to be waiting on, and you can feel the heat of their stare. And so as I would be on the phone, one of the things that I would try to do is talk loudly. Oh, you want to transfer that money? And I would do that. Why? Because I would want them to know I'm actually doing something. I'm not idle. I'm not indifferent to their presence. I'm actually doing something. I may not be doing what they want at the moment, but I am active in this circumstance. Some of you showed up here this morning, and it has been the best week ever. Others showed up, and it's been terrible. Some of you might have trouble keeping your eyes open this morning, and it has nothing to do with how failing I have been to be riveting, but it's because you couldn't sleep last night. There are taxing burdens on your heart, and there is anxiety and apprehension and fear and all this stuff that you came in here dragging. And maybe it is that on your way in, as you looked towards the door, you kind of looked up towards heaven and you thought, do you know what's going on? I'm telling you that he does. And I'm telling you also, not only does he see what's going on, but in your circumstance, which of them? All of them, he's at work. And I believe his invitation for me and for you is to experience a shift in focus, not only of what I'm paying attention to, but even what I ask. That I am focusing not simply on how I feel in the moment, but I am asking myself, what might he be up to in this? And then I say, what are you up to? What are you doing in this circumstance? Whatever it is, how can you help me to see what you're doing that is somehow, amazingly, for my good? I believe sincerely that God is not only honored by that request, but I think that's the request that he'll answer. The circumstances you're facing, he sees them and he's active. He wants you to know it. The question is that settled in your heart and mind? Will you bow your heads with me?